and then she's from University of Waterloo. She talked about an interesting topics what I learned about pedagogies from Magic School. So Diana, it's your showtime.
Hello everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right, cool. I noticed everyone's sitting at the back of the class, which is fairly typical of a university lecture, but hopefully if people come in late, they can do the walk of shame up to the front. So today I'm going to talk to you about what I learned about pedagogy from Magic School. If you're here to hear about like magicians, like, is this your card? That's not the kind of magic I'm talking about. The kind of magic I'm talking about is the kind that you cast with a wand, because I had a really interesting experience at Magic School, and I unexpectedly learned a lot about teaching from it that I thought I would share with you folks today. So here's my rough outline. I'm going to talk a bit about my background and the point of this Magic School, and then I'll go through 7 lessons that I took away from Magic School, none of which are how to banish a demon, although I did learn that. And then for each one of those lessons, I have kind of an example of a technique that you can use in your classroom. So try and match those up. And maybe you'll have 7 cool ideas, 1 or 2 of which you can use in your classes, and sum it up with some key takeaways at the end. So a tiny little bit of background about me. I've been teaching for 12 years at the University of Waterloo. So far, I think I've taught about 20 different courses, maybe up to 21 now. And I won teaching awards at various levels. I had a department one and a university-wide one, and then last week I won a faculty level one. So I've got all 3, and I'm sort of famous or perhaps infamous for including lots of interactive and interesting teaching techniques. But the most important thing that anybody needs to know about me is that I am the biggest Harry Potter fan you will ever meet. And so when the chance came up for me to attend Bothwell School of Witchcraft, I jumped at the chance. And this is basically, if you've ever done like a murder mystery game where you're given sort of a character to play and then it sort of unfolds, it's like that but on a very grand scale. So it takes place in a castle in England with 150 players. It's a complete collective improvisational game, so there's no scripts, nothing. Everyone just has their character and they play out as if they're attending a magic school. And you can go to this game as a student or as a professor. Most of the people who are playing professors are not actually professors. I mean, I thought about going as a professor, and I 100% would have put it on my CV if I had gotten it. But in the end, I decided, nah, like, I do that enough. I don't need to do it while I'm on vacation. So I just went as a first-year student, and it was fantastic. But the thing that I wasn't expecting was how these professors, again, these are just random people, they've never met before the game, they don't have any teaching experience, but they were playing professor characters. And they each had ideas about what makes a good lesson, right? They had to create lessons and teach them to these students, and they all had many similar common threads between them, and many of them were really well aligned with good pedagogical techniques. So it's kind of interesting to look at what a non-expert, a non-teacher thinks good teaching looks like, and that's what my presentation is going to be about, sort of grabbing the common threads and seeing which of those you can use in your own classrooms. So, while this might not be what your university looks like, and this might not be what your teaching staff looks like, and this might not be what your classroom looks like, with some lovely simmering cauldrons in our alchemy class, you can still have some magic in your classroom. So my first of 7, I'm going to try and get through them all. Thing that most of these professor players did was have some kind of structure to their lectures. Every single one of them had a mix of theoretical and practical content. Now remember, they're making all of this up. There isn't actually a textbook for demonology. They made it all up. But they all knew that in a lecture situation, there has to be this balance between discussing theory and practice. And so again, most followed this kind of pattern of having a discussion first about the theory, doing some kind of simplified practice in a controlled environment, and then maybe doing a larger, more complex challenge. So for example, in magical defense, we practiced spells on each other, and then we went out into the grounds of the castle, and there was, lo and behold, a monster there that we had to all fight together using the techniques we had learned in class. And so that really benefits the students by scaffolding the knowledge. So you can start with this theoretical, build on that, and then address a more difficult challenge later on. So how can you use this? I would suggest incorporating active learning into your classrooms. And now active learning has, it's a buzzword, it's been around forever, and people think, oh no, that's so much work. Active learning can be as simple as just asking people questions. That's technically active learning. So anything that involves students in various ways. And a framework or a structure that I think is very useful is me, we, you. So essentially, me would be the instructor doing something on the board, so showing the students how to do a thing. We is doing it together, so the instructor and the students together. And then you would be the students then doing the thing, or maybe a more complex thing. So you can kind of think about scaffolding that in the sense of watching the instructor do something, participating in something, and then taking ownership of those ideas and concepts and doing them themselves. So that's a good kind of framework to structure a 50-minute lecture. It's a really good idea, I should get better at this, to state the learning goals every lecture. So everyone kind of has over the course what you want your students to learn, but it's really nice if you can kind of revisit those every lecture. So I'm giving myself that advice as well. I don't usually do that, but have sort of outcomes and learning goals for each lecture so that students know that they're on track when they can do those things that you want them to be able to do. And I mentioned this already, active learning can be literally anything. It doesn't have to be a complex activity like some of the ones I'm going to be talking about. It can just be any kind of interaction, any kind of thing that gets them doing stuff in the class, whether it's in a small group, by themselves, or sort of following along with something that you're doing. So that was structure. Second of all, we had this idea of motivation. So all the professors, again, recognize the importance of motivating these students to attend these classes. Because, of course, we didn't have to be there. We weren't actually attending the school. We could have gone off into the grounds and fought a monster. And so they had to sort of keep us there with maybe a mix of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So instructors could do things like give you house points for participating in class. Obviously, that doesn't work in the university setting. But even things like, what we learn in class today may actually save your life one day. And in the game, of course, we believed it. So having a mix of, what motivates the students and using that to get them to participate and be there and pay attention. And again, it benefits students by showing the relevance of what you're doing in class to their lives, their interests, their future careers, the rest of their courses, and their lives in general. So for an example of how you can incorporate motivation into the classroom, I'm going to return to what I talked about last year. So I apologize if any of you were there last year. I'm going to repeat for the next minute or so. When I sort of incorporated my think like an actuary component, I'm using a lot of air quotes today, I apologize, I should put those away. So incorporating more sort of nuanced discussion. So rather than just what are the calculations, thinking about how external forces might affect the calculations that you've done, or thinking about professionalism, or thinking about ethics. So things to get people thinking about how what they're doing in the classroom is going to connect with the wider world and their workplace when they eventually get to it. So my favorite thing to do is just use what's going on in the news. So there was a music festival in Ontario that was canceled due to rain, and then they were basically trying to get money from the insurance company, but the insurance company was like, no, it was probably fraud, you weren't actually planning to hold it in the first place, and then it went like litigation. And so I put that on the final exam. Like, I changed the details, but just using what's actually going on is a really good way to make what you're doing in class relevant to the world, to show them that this stuff is actually relevant. It's really good, again, to have real-world examples that don't have a right answer. Like, we're so used to, in terms of preparing for exams, there's 5 choices, and one of them is right. But the real world, as you all know, doesn't work that way. So having questions where there are shades of gray, and where like the quality of your justification, rather than your actual answer, is what's important. And again, it's important to prepare students for workplace challenges. So having data that's messy, or having them have a short timeline to submit something, or having the requirements change partway through a project that they've been working on. All these kinds of things happen in the real world, and giving students the tools to be able to address and face those challenges is super important. So that's my suggestion. Again, it doesn't have to be a huge thing, just have this idea of some areas of gray in the answers that you're accepting for assignments or tests or whatever. Next, all the professors had very different styles in terms of the way they delivered the lectures. Remember, these are not teachers. These are just random people from like 4 different countries all over the world. They never met each other before the game. And some of them are actors, like 1 or 2 of them were actors, but most of them were just sort of normal people, and they were in this persona of a professor, and each of their delivery styles was completely different. There wasn't one sort of professor style. So there were sort of like the old and slow, venerable instructors, there were the really energetic ones, there were the absent-minded ones, there were the super evil ones, there was everything you can imagine. But all of them were effective in the sense that they harnessed their creative energy and brought that to the classroom. So they were engaging speakers. Even an evil instructor. I learned a lot from my evil demonology instructor. That was the guy on the front slide. So yes, I learned tons from him. I got lots of house points as well for my house. It's my best subject, demonology. So yeah, they were all engaging, and they really showed the passion that they have for this subject. Again, the subject was completely made up. They made up everything. So of course they sounded knowledgeable about it because they made up what is the truth. But you know, so you can't quite do that. You can't make up a branch of actuarial science and then teach it. But you can bring your enthusiasm, and enthusiasm is contagious. When you're excited, your students will be excited too. When you're engaged, they'll be engaged too. So we don't really have a specific technique that matches with delivery other than just my advice to share your passion. So all of you chose actuarial science at some point. And maybe it was, you know, the idea of helping policyholders and helping people manage their financial lives. Maybe it was just really neat. You thought it was cool. Maybe it was you wanted to make lots of money. I don't know how you can harness that, but everyone chose that for a reason. And remember that. Tap into that. Tap into why you find this subject exciting. And the sincerity that you show for your passion for the subject will come through. I guess it also is a good idea to find what matters to you. So if what matters to you is sort of the social justice aspect of actuarial science, then reach into that and bring that to your students, and they'll care about it as well. So that's my advice. It's not really a technique, just use your passion. You do have it, just tap into it and bring it to the classroom because the students will feed off it and become passionate as well. Okay, is this the fourth one? I think I'm at the fourth one now. So interaction, again, these are non-teaching experts. They've never taught before in their lives, and yet every single one of them knows that sitting in a class for 50 minutes and listening to somebody talk is boring. Nobody tried that because everybody intuitively knows that that's not an effective way to engage people. So every single professor they weren't told to do this, but every single one of them included some amount of interaction because they knew intuitively that that would be a better way to create a better experience. So there were lots of different ways that people did this. They might have demonstrations, so brewing a potion, showing the effects of it, and then having the class try it. Or you know, doing some spell to go back in time. So again, obviously none of those are going to translate exactly to your classrooms. But just even things like asking students questions from this, you know, made-up textbook, like, okay, what are the 3 components necessary to summon a demon? Or allowing students the opportunity to ask questions as well. So interaction just is extremely important. And it doesn't have to be super formal. It doesn't have to be graded even. But you can't teach effectively by talking at somebody for 50 minutes. And I'm going to break that by the fact that I'm just talking at you for 30 minutes. So do as I say, not as I do. But just the benefit of that, of course, is keeping the students engaged and interested because it's hard to sit and listen for 50 minutes. Here's one example of a way that you can incorporate interaction. Again, I apologize if you were at the Actuarial Teaching Conference. You've heard me say this too. This is kind of like a hodgepodge of all my other ideas. So again, this is one possible way, certainly not the only way, to incorporate interaction into your classroom, and that's with what we could call clickers or a student response system. So what this allows is everyone has like a little remote or an app on their phone, and you can put up a multiple choice question and people can ring in their answers, and you can either keep track of it or not for grades. It's just, the benefit of this is it allows students to try out questions that you give them on the material they've just learned, and the benefit of it is it lets people try something and possibly fail, but in a really low stakes way. Like if you get this question wrong in class, then that's important to know that you had it wrong. You can fix that misconception right away and then leave the room knowing what the right answer was, rather than waiting until the midterm, failing a question because you didn't understand it the first time you heard it, and then that's a lot of marks that you've lost. So it lets people try techniques in a low stakes way where the cost of being wrong is very low, but then they can make sure that they iron out any misconceptions. So that's really the benefit of that. They get immediate feedback on how they're understanding a new concept, and more importantly, maybe more importantly, probably less importantly, you as the instructor also get the information about how well the students are understanding what you've just told them. So if you just do an example and then you ask a clicker question on a similar example and 80% of them get it wrong, you know, okay, I don't think I explained that very well. Let's go back and remind you of this other thing. So you can turn it into an opportunity to revisit topics that the students are struggling with. And if you didn't do that, you might never know that 80% of the people had no idea what you were talking about. So I love these as a tool for both giving students practice and giving you as an instructor feedback on how people are understanding things. The other way I use them is to actually just collect data that I can then use in examples. So I'll just, if I'm teaching a probability class, I'll be like, okay, everybody, how many Microsoft products and how many Apple products do you own? And then we can calculate the correlation of those two things, and it'll turn out to be negative. Surprise! Because you're either like an Apple fan or a Microsoft fan or nothing in between. So you can use the data, then you can just do anything you like with it once you have it. So it's kind of neat. And it makes it more sort of immediate that you're using this live data rather than an example that you've cooked up in your office. It makes it really more immediate. Good practices is to at least allow some absences. So students have to miss class maybe for some reason. Just to cut down on the administrative, it's nice to just be like 25% of the marks are just forgiven if you miss them or something like that. And the grading scheme, the way I do it, you can do whatever you like, is 1 mark for answering anything and a 2nd mark if you get the right answer. So it's rewarding participation as well as accuracy. And then again, you would take sort of like the top 75% of the marks that they obtained. And that whole component is worth a small percentage of their overall final grade. But there's a myriad of different ways to actually attach that to grades. I think I have another slide about this. Yes, I do. So just a couple more details. There's lots of different systems. Again, the one that I am familiar with is iClicker, but there's also Poll Everywhere, Socrative. There's also Kahoot. I've heard of that one. Several other ones. If you're interested in this idea, I just suggest Googling classroom response systems and find one that suits your needs. If you have a small classroom, there's lots of free options available. If you have a really large classroom, it gets trickier. So see what's out there and see what works for you. But I really love this idea of being able to sort of test people constantly in a low stakes way, because that gives them a much better sense of how they're doing, and it gives you a sense of how they're doing as well. It's not a panacea, of course. It's not the perfect tool. It does have some drawbacks. It takes time to create questions. It takes class time to actually ask them. So you're sort of subbing out one example for a clicker question. But I think that is a good thing. It creates more interaction. So rather than you going out there and doing 3 examples in a row, maybe you do 2, and then the third one is a we kind of thing. So it doesn't have to take away from what you do. It can sort of replace other stuff and still cover the same amount of material. And there is some non-zero amount of administrative work in terms of organizing the grades and stuff. If you have support from like an instructional support coordinator or anything like that, or teaching assistants, that's great. Otherwise, it's not too hard to learn. There's this pretty steep curve in terms of that. All right. I think I'm on 5 now. I cannot remember. I think so. I should have put numbers on them. So peer learning is another technique that a lot of the professors surprisingly use. Again, I was pleasantly surprised by this. These are people that don't necessarily have any instruction on how to teach, but maybe they remembered what was effective for them when they were students, or maybe they just thought it would create interesting play within the game. But having professors having students instruct each other in various ways, so either working on problems together in small groups, or actually helping each other with problems. So different groups do different things, and then they share their responses together, either with the whole class as a whole or in sort of subset groups glommed together. This is a hugely beneficial activity for students for lots of the reasons I've previously stated. It's interaction, it's active learning, but also it benefits the strong students by giving them the opportunity to learn by teaching. Like, I think I never understand something quite so well as after I teach it for the first time. Because you really have to understand something well to be able to teach it. And the same thing applies to students. If you know that you're responsible for explaining your justification or your solution to another student, you're going to understand it really well, more so than just if you had to do it for yourself. And for all students, not just the weaker students, it gives additional perspectives. So somebody might not understand the instructor's explanation, but an explanation from their peer, they might have an analogy or a common language they can use that will reach them and become sort of a second perspective that might make the explanation more clear. So it benefits strong, weak, medium, all of the students in terms of peer learning. So my example for a peer learning technique is called a jigsaw. It actually has a name this time. How it works is this. You have two phases. And in the first phase, you'll divide your class into groups. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that there are 36 people in this room. There aren't quite, but imagine there are. I would divide you into 6 groups of 6. So the first group I would give a topic, so maybe chapter 1. Second group I would give another topic, say chapter 2, whatever. You sort of give each group a topic, a certain lecture, maybe a problem on that material, and that group is responsible for writing down the key points from that chapter or from that topic on a piece of paper. So it's a group thing together, a small group responsible for summarizing the key points from that particular topic and or maybe completing a problem on that material. So that's phase 1. You do that for about half the class time. And then for phase 2, you create cross-sectional groups. So again, if this was the room and all the desks were full, you guys would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The cross-sectional groups are going to be this way. So the first row, the second row, the third row. So each of the new groups in the second phase has one representative from each of the original groups. Does that make sense? This room is really perfect for this example because there's. So in the second phase, each of the groups in the second phase has one representative from each of the original groups. Yeah. So like you'd look across the rows and you would have 5 new group members, each of which had worked on a different problem in the first phase. And then in the second phase, once you've created those groups, the students take turns presenting their summaries. So whoever was the representative from group 1 would talk about what they did, and then whoever was the representative from group 2 would talk about what they did. And the instructor can run around and sort of pass the sheets back and forth between the groups and give everyone the chance to talk and listen to 5 other people. So again, this has all of the great benefits of pure instruction. So you're going to understand your thing really, really well because you know you have to explain it to 5 other people. But it's not as scary as getting up at the front of the room and talking to the whole class. You're still in a small group of supportive peers, and it makes a really neat way. I've often used this as sort of a review activity before the midterm or before the final exam. It's a great way to do that, just kind of summarize the key points and then share them with each other. And I saw a question. Yes?
I just wondered how much planning, is this a one-day thing, or do you tell the students before class what they're going to do, or do you spring it on them at the start of class and this is all in one class?
You could do it any way you like. The way I've done it is just all in one class. And then while I'm walking around in the first phase, I'm making sure that nobody's writing anything down blatantly incorrect on the sheets. You could also do it maybe over 2 classes. So class 1, they do the summaries, and then you can actually vet them more thoroughly and then share them with everybody. And then in the second class, they could do the cross-sectional groups. It would work either way. I've always done it just as a one-shot, but it could work either way. Thank you for asking. All right, so that's a neat application. Again, useful as a review before a test, or anytime you're introducing a new topic, maybe you can sort of summarize everything you know about what you've already done, and then think about, okay, how is that going to change in the future? Connections. So this is my 6th, I think. Really should have put numbers on it. This is a really cool thing as well. So remember, this game was taking place in a magical school, and each instructor had their classes, but there was also an overall plot going on. So in the game that I played, there was a bunch of wizards outside the school whose goal was to reveal the magical world to the mundane world, and so they were a threat, an external threat to the school, as sort of a backdrop for this magical school that was going on. And what ended up happening was many of the professors' lessons, either consciously or unconsciously, were reinforcing some of those themes. And what it did was that had the effect of linking the individual lessons within the larger curriculum of this magic school. So one thing we learned in one class might then come in handy in a later class. And that was really neat. And I don't know how much planning went into it, but I suspect a lot of it was just by chance. Because the professors don't necessarily know what order their classes are going to be in. So this idea of having things in your class that will tie back to the larger curriculum of your program is an extremely important thing. So this benefits students by creating an overall picture of their field rather than just isolation. Everything I do in this course belongs in this course only and has no relevance to any other course. It's so easy to think that way in like silos. But really what you learn in financial math is going to apply in life contingencies. What you learn in stochastic processes is going to apply in other courses as well. So there are connections, and it's really neat when you can make those and establish those. So my suggestion for making connections is a tool called a concept map. Essentially what this is a visual organization of information, and you can sort of think about it the way you might doodle. So write down the main topic, interest, and so like then you branch off from like what is it, how is it calculated, how do we use it. So you can create topics that are linked in various ways to that main topic, and then go down the branches as far as you want. So like mortality, like okay, what models are there? There's these models. What assumptions do they have? What's our F? What's our S? What's our survival function? So all of those things, and then what are the relationships between those? So the concept map can kind of organize material in a visual way, which is really handy for some learners. You can use this within a single course, or even more neatly across multiple courses. So what you learn in one course is going to relate to another, and you can sort of do that visually to create an overall picture of the program. I know I'm running out of time. So this is my last one. This was a technique that not every professor used, but a lot of them did, which was basically instead of acting like an instructor, telling people what to think, they were acting as a facilitator, so allowing the discussion to freely flow and allowing students to debate with each other and bring up different viewpoints, but not just sitting back and doing nothing, sort of asking probing questions and guiding things in the right direction, and occasionally summarizing. So like if several people have made the same point, they could say, okay, I hear this point, does anyone have anything on the other side to talk about? So this is really, really neat when there's any kind of sticky issue, so anything with a shade of gray to it, like ethics in particular. So as a facilitator, the instructor's job can be really difficult to try to keep people civil, not let any arguments break out, but it can be really valuable because the students are then able to reach those conclusions on their own. And that's such a much more powerful experience. The first time anyone used this when I was a student was we basically developed the simplex method in like an optimization course. He didn't tell us what the simplex method was. We figured it out. All he did was say, okay, what if we do, like, what are we going to start with? What variable are we going to start with in our model? And then we would argue and say, okay, what about this? And we're like, well, what if it's on the edge of the feasible region? And we go, oh, wait, we're going to do this. So essentially, as a class, we collectively came up with the idea of the simplex method. And all the instructor did was just guide us in the right direction and ask the questions that would fence in the final answer. So it was really cool. It was a transformational learning experience. And if you have the ability to do that, that's really great, because then it gives the students agency and sort of ownership of their ideas, because they came up with it themselves. They're going to remember it way more than if you just handed them this formula on a silver platter. So it's a really powerful technique if you can use it. It's difficult to be a facilitator, especially if the students are really shy and don't want to talk. So one way that you can use this, or the way that I've used it, is with an ethics debate. So I had basically the topic of should genetic testing results be able to be used in insurance? And rather than I'll just let people go at it, I kind of preceded them with ideas. So I divided the class in half, and I told half of them to come up with reasons why they should be allowed, and the other half to come up with reasons why they shouldn't. So each of them had sort of been assigned a position. They weren't arguing from